the spring of 1841, a Rocky Mountain trapper named Old Bill Williams left the rendezvous at Green River with a rawhide sack tied behind his saddle. 9 pounds of something dark and greasy, pressed flat, sewn shut in the animal's own skin. He rode north into country with no trading post for 300 miles, no cabin waiting, no guarantee of a fire every night. 4 months later, the men who'd ridden out that same week with fresh-killed elk and slabs of salted bacon were gaunt, sick. 2 of them didn't make it back at all, and this in a land so thick with game that a man could shoot breakfast from his own doorway. Old Bill wasn't gaunt. He was still eating out of that same rawhide sack the day he rode back into camp, and by his own account, he'd fed 2 other men off it besides himself. The elk meat spoiled in 9 days. The bacon ran out in 6 weeks, and the salt in it wasn't enough to save what was left. The sack never turned, not once, not in 4 months of mountain summer heat by day and freezing nights, not with grizzly country all around, and not one lick of ice to be had anywhere on the trail. Here's the twist, friend. What was packed into that sack cost less back then, adjusted for what a trapper earned, than what you'll pay for a fast food combo meal today. No smokehouse. No salt barrel standing by the cabin door. No root cellar dug into a hillside. 3 ingredients, 4 if you're particular, that you could walk into any grocery store in this country this afternoon and carry out for under $20. It's called pemmican. And if you've never heard the word, or you've heard it and figured it for some kind of survivalist mythology, a legend that got bigger with every retelling around a campfire, I want you to sit with that for a second. Because the reason you don't know how to make it isn't that it's hard. It isn't that the knowledge got lost in a fire or died out with the last mountain man. It's that somewhere along the way, it became profitable for you to believe food goes bad in 3 days. A refrigerator in every kitchen, a freezer in every garage, a payment on both of them every single month. Convenient? Sure. Necessary? Old Bill Williams would have laughed in your face. My grandfather Eli raised me after my daddy died in the timber when I was young, and before Eli went, he sat me down every winter for 11 years and made me copy every last thing he knew into a leather journal, page after page in my own hand so it would live past both of us. This is me keeping that promise to him. By the time we're done here today, you'll know the exact cut of meat to buy and why it matters more than people think. You'll know the ratio your great-great-grandmother could eyeball without a scale. You'll know the one step, the one single step, that decides whether what you make sits on a shelf for 6 months untouched by mold or rot, or turns rancid and makes a liar out of every word I'm telling you inside of 3 weeks. That step isn't in a single pre-packaged survival kit sold in this country today, and I'll tell you exactly why when we get there. Stay with me by choice, neighbor. This is worth the 20 minutes. Before we get into it, pull the trigger on subscribe. Not for me, because the buried skills we drag back into daylight around here one at a time, week after week, you're going to want the next one. There are 6 pieces to doing this right, 6, and we're not skipping a single one because skipping is exactly how 3 generations of Americans forgot a food source that fed the Plains tribes, the fur trade, the polar expeditions, and half the wagon trains that crossed this continent without a single refrigerator between the Mississippi and the Pacific. Why your meat has to die twice. Here's a fact that never makes it into the modern survival channels, and it's the whole foundation of why this works at all. Meat spoils because of 2 things working together: water and warmth. Bacteria need both. Take away either one and you've taken away spoilage. A refrigerator attacks the warmth side of that equation and does it forever, at the cost of electricity, at the cost of a compressor that can fail, at the cost of a power outage taking your whole investment with it in a single Tennessee ice storm. Your great-great-grandfather attacked the other side. He killed the water. That's the whole secret sitting right there in plain sight. And it's the first thing people skip when they try this at home and it doesn't work. They start with fresh meat, or worse, they start with meat that's only partway dried, still got some give to it, still chewy the way we like our modern jerky, and they wonder 6 weeks later why it's gone gray and started to smell. Lean beef is what you want, not fatty. Lean, and I mean trim it hard. Round steak, flank steak, sirloin tip, whatever's cheapest that week at the store, because the cut barely matters as long as the fat's trimmed off the outside. The fat goes back in later on purpose in a form bacteria flat out cannot use, and we'll get to why in piece 3. For now, all you need is lean muscle meat. Slice it thin, a 1/4 inch, no thicker, and slice against the grain, not with it. With the grain, and you get meat that shreds like string when you try to grind it later against the grain and it breaks clean. Lay the strips out and dehydrate them low and slow. A food dehydrator set to 160 degrees will get you there in 6 to 8 hours. An oven on its lowest setting with the door cracked an inch does the same job. Just watch it closer. You're not done at dry to the touch. You're done when a strip snaps clean in half instead of bending. That snap is the whole test. If it bends, there's still water hiding in there, and water hiding in there is a colony of bacteria waiting for its chance 6 weeks from now. That's roughly $6 to $8 of meat at any grocery store in the country. And piece 1 is done. Grinding it to nothing, and why the shape matters more than you'd think. Here's where 100 years of soft living gets in the way without you even noticing it. Modern beef jerky stays in strips, on purpose because we like the chew. We like tearing a piece off with our teeth in the truck on the way to work. Pemmican was never built for that. It was built to be dust. Break the dried meat down until it's a fine, almost flour-like powder. No chunks bigger than a grain of rice left anywhere in the batch. A food processor will do in 90 seconds what a Cree or Blackfoot woman used to do with 2 flat stones and 20 minutes of patient work, grinding strip after strip down between them, until what was left could sift through her fingers like coarse cornmeal. Either method gets you the same place. You're not done grinding until it's powder. Here's why the shape matters as much as the drying does. Strips of dried meat, even bone-dry ones, trap tiny air pockets between the fibers when you pack them together. Air pockets trap moisture that condenses out of the air around them, especially anywhere the humidity swings the way it does across most of this country between seasons. Moisture is the enemy of 6 months on a shelf. Powder, packed tight and sealed in fat, leaves nowhere for that moisture to hide. This one step, grinding the meat all the way down instead of leaving it in recognizable strips, is the difference between a food that was engineered to survive a full winter and a food that was engineered to survive a Tuesday commute. Both are dried meat. Only one of them is pemmican. The fat and the part. Every recipe blog on the internet gets wrong. This is the piece the recipe sites get wrong every single time, and it's the one that separates food that lasts through a winter from food that quietly turns rancid on your shelf while you're not looking. You need rendered fat, specifically tallowy, beef sweet, melted down low and slow until it's fully liquid, then strained through cheesecloth or a fine mesh strainer to pull out every last scrap of connective tissue, every trace of meat, every drop of water that might still be hiding in the raw sweet. Not butter. Butter's got milk solids and water content baked into it, and it'll turn your pemmican rancid inside a month. Not lard straight off a store shelf either. Most of it's been processed in ways that leave moisture and additives in it your great-grandmother never had to think about. Rendered, clarified tallow, poured while it's still liquid and hot straight into the bowl of ground meat powder, then worked through with clean hands or with a wooden spoon if you'd rather, until every last strand of that dried meat is coated and sealed in fat top to bottom, no dry powder left visible anywhere in the mix. The ratio matters more here than anywhere else in the whole process, and it's the number most people online get wrong because they're guessing instead of working from what actually survived in the old accounts. You want roughly equal parts by weight, meat powder to tallow, leaning just slightly heavier on the meat side. Somewhere around 55% meat to 45% fat if you want to get precise about it. Though your great-great-grandmother never once owned a kitchen scale and did this entirely by feel. Too little fat and air can still work its way in between the meat particles, and that means spoilage sooner rather than later. Too much fat and the batch turns greasy, doesn't hold its shape, and goes rancid nearly twice as fast because fat itself, even sealed, has its own clock running. This is the step that lived in the memory of every mountain man, every Hudson's Bay Company trader, every plains tribe that depended on pemmican to survive a winter, and it is not written into a single mass-market survival kit sold in a sporting goods store today. And here's exactly why, because I want you to see the mechanism, not just take my word for it. Rendering fat properly, straining it clean, takes 30 to 45 minutes of standing over a pot. It doesn't scale. A company that wants to sell you a freeze-dried survival meal in a foil pouch with a 25-year shelf life isn't going to build a product around a process that takes 45 minutes of hands-on labor per batch. They're going to sell you something engineered in a facility, shelf-stable through chemistry instead of technique, and charge you $8, $9, $10 for a single meal that weighs less than what fits in your palm. That's not a conspiracy. Nobody sat in a boardroom and voted to bury pemmican. It's just how markets work. The thing that scales gets sold. The thing that takes 45 minutes of a person's attention gets forgotten. And then the market fills the hole that forgetting leaves behind with something they can put a barcode on. Now, optional, and this is where you land closer to $19 than $12. Fold in dried berries once the fat and meat are fully combined. Cranberries, blueberries, even raisins chopped fine. Whatever's cheapest and shelf-stable at your store that week. Crush them down small before you add them so they distribute evenly through the batch instead of clumping. This is what turned plain pemmican into what both the Cree and the mountain men who learned from them called the good stuff, sometimes recorded in old journals as berry pemmican, to separate it from the plain kind. The berries carry vitamin C that neither the meat nor the fat provide on their own, which mattered enormously on a diet that might otherwise run for months without a single fresh vegetable. And it hardly touches the shelf life at all, maybe shaving off a few weeks at the outside edge of that 6-month window, which is a trade most men considered well worth making. The seal, the single step that decides everything. Press the finished mixture firm into whatever you're storing it in. Wax paper folded tight and twisted at the ends works. A wide-mouth mason jar works better. Packed down hard with the back of a spoon so there's no air gap anywhere inside. The old rawhide method, sewing the mixture into a cleaned and dried animal skin, is the original, and if you're the type who wants to go all the way, it's worth trying once just to understand why it worked. But for most of us today, a mason jar or a vacuum-sealed bag does the same job with a lot less mess. The rule, whatever container you choose, is the same rule old Bill Williams's sack followed without either of you needing to know the chemistry behind it. Pack it tight enough that no air pocket survives anywhere in the mixture. Air is the only thing left standing between your pemmican and 6 months on a shelf. Not heat. Not time by itself. Air. Store the finished jar somewhere cool and dark. Notice I didn't say refrigerated. Cool. A pantry shelf away from direct sunlight works. A root cellar, if you're lucky enough to have one, works even better and can stretch that 6-month figure out considerably further. 6 months is the conservative number, the one I'd stand behind for anybody trying this the first time in a kitchen instead of out on a trail. Properly rendered, properly ground, properly sealed with no air pocket hiding anywhere in the mix. Men carried this a full year in journals I've read myself, and ate it at the far end, no worse for the wear than the day they packed it. What $19 actually buys you? Let's put real numbers on this, because a number people can check against their own grocery receipt is worth more than me telling you it's cheap and hoping you believe me. 2 pounds of lean beef on sale runs somewhere between $10 and $14 depending on your region and the week. A pound of beef sweat, which most butcher counters will either have on hand or give you for next to nothing since it's a cut they'd otherwise throw away, runs $2 to $4. A small bag of dried cranberries or blueberries, if you choose to add them, is another $3 to $4, and you'll use less than half the bag. Total out the door is right around $19, and that batch yields close to 2.5 pounds of finished pemmican once the fat's worked in. Now compare that to what's sitting on a sporting goods store shelf marketed as emergency food. A single foil pouch of freeze-dried survival food, the kind with a flashy label and a 25-year shelf life claim printed across the front, runs $8 to $11 and contains maybe 600 calories. Most of it rehydrated starch. Your $19 of pemmican carries somewhere around 3,500 to 4,000 calories total, dense enough that a fist-sized chunk, roughly a quarter pound, gets a grown man through a full day of hard labor out in the cold. No cooler required, no ice, no generator running a chest freezer through a power outage, which is worth sitting with for a second, because that's exactly the scenario most people picture when they think about needing stored food in the first place, and it's exactly the scenario a freezer full of meat cannot survive. A jar of pemmican doesn't care whether the grid is up. That's not a marketing claim. That's the same jar that sat behind old Bill Williams's saddle for 4 months in grizzly country, in a summer with no ice anywhere on the trail, while better provisioned men who'd packed fresh meat and salted bacon went hungry around him. The mistake that ends careers and how to never make it. Here's the step nobody talks about, and it's the 6th piece, the one I told you at the start we'd get to. Every single failure story you'll find online about somebody's pemmican going bad traces back to this same mistake, every time, without exception. They don't let the meat finish drying all the way before they grind it. I told you back in Piece 1, the test isn't dry to the touch. The test is a clean snap. If a strip bends even a little before it breaks, there's water still hiding inside the fibers. Water your fingers can't feel from the outside because it's trapped deep in the muscle, not sitting on the surface. Grind that strip into powder along with the rest of the batch, seal it in fat, and you've just built a sealed, insulated incubator for whatever bacteria was riding along in that hidden moisture. It won't show for a week, sometimes 2. Then the smell hits, or the mold shows along the inside of the jar, and the batch is done. Every ounce of it. This is why I told you to trust the snap test over the clock. 8 hours is a guideline, not a guarantee. Humidity in your kitchen, the thickness of your slices, even the cut of meat you chose, all of it changes how long the drying actually takes. Test a strip at the 6-hour mark. If it bends, it's not done, however dry it looks. Test again at 7. Test again at 8. The day you get a clean, brittle snap on the first try is the day you know the whole batch is ready to grind, and not 1 minute before. 6 pieces. Lean meat, dried past the point most people quit. Ground to powder, not left in strips. Fat rendered clean and worked through by hand at the right ratio. Packed with no air pocket left standing anywhere in the mix. Stored cool and dark. And the drying tested by snap, not by clock. Miss any one of the 6 and you've made expensive jerky that spoils like anything else in your fridge. Get all 6 and you've made a food that outlasted men who packed better-known provisions and still didn't make it back. A few things people ask me. Can you use a different meat besides beef? You can. Venison was actually more common than beef in most of the old accounts, particularly among the plains tribes and the trappers who lived off what they shot rather than what they bought. Bison, when it was available, was the original meat pemmican was built around, long before beef cattle were common on the continent at all. The process is identical no matter what lean meat you start with. Lean is the only requirement. Does it need to be cooked before you eat it? No, and this trips people up because we're used to thinking of dried meat the way we think of raw meat, something dangerous until it hits a stovetop. The drying process itself, done properly down to that clean snap, is what makes it shelf-stable and safe, the same way it made it safe for a trapper 400 miles from the nearest fire some nights. You can eat it straight out of the jar, cold, exactly as it is, and that was the entire point of the food to begin with. A ration that needed no cooking, no water, no fire, nothing but your own hand and your own mouth. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, the skills that got buried under 100 years of convenience and a marketing budget, you know exactly what to do. Hit subscribe and I'll see you on the next one.